welcome back. My name is Matthew Sky Osborne. I am doing No Shave November, as you can see. But what I want to do with this episode is talk about my background and who I am to kind of give you an opening understanding of where I come from. And hopefully, this will help you understand how I arrive at some of the decisions I've made and how I've become the person I am, and hopes that someone can relate to it and learn from what I'm saying, and then or we can begin a conversation about whatever it is that we're talking about. This is not an exercise in vanity. This is not me being narcissistic. Like I said, I just want to talk about where I come from in hopes that people can relate to some of the things that I say. Okay, I was born in Springfield, Ohio. Some of you might know where that is, some of you might not. No, it's not where the Simpsons are. I used to think it was. But born in Springfield, Ohio, and I was raised primarily in Columbus, Ohio. And Columbus is not a very diverse place. If you've ever been there, it's my understanding is predominantly, Caucasian. And my mom and dad are from Tennessee. And my mom grew up in Memphis, and my dad in Mount Pleasant. Mount Pleasant is outside of Nashville, and a very small town. And so, during the school year, I would, obviously be in Columbus, going to school in elementary, and then during the summers we would go to Tennessee and spend time with our family out there. My mom and dad are both African American, and so going to Memphis, and if you ever been there, it's like the exact opposite of Ohio. It's predominantly African American. It's changed now more. It's that Memphis has become more of a tourist location, I think, with Elvis Presley's home being there, and there's a lot of things happening downtown in Memphis, and Civil Rights Museum. So you get a lot of tourists going through Memphis, but primarily at the heart of it, it's African American, and so I was just trying to say that to say that's where growing up I got a lot of my culture. With my family being down south, and got to learn about civil rights and Martin Luther King, and Stax record company, Isaac Hayes, just a lot of culture, just a lot of history in Memphis. And mom and dad met at Tennessee State University in Nashville, and they grew up telling me about what happened when Martin Luther King got shot, and the fighting, the riots, and how people reacted to it, and how I think it was either the Army or the National Guard, I can't remember, came to their campus and shot off side of the buildings and were threatening students. And to this day, and mom tells me that some of those students disappeared. They don't know what happened to them. So that's where I got a lot of my culture growing up. But if I could back up for just a second, the elementary school I went to in Ohio was Maranatha Christian, I think North, and that was again predominantly a white school. And me, my older brother, and my younger brother, and I think maybe like two other kids. There were maybe like five of us, five black kids in that school, out of like maybe 100 or so. And I didn't know that I was black until a kid pointed it out to me. I can't remember how old I was. I was maybe in the third grade or something. I can't remember. And a kid came up to me one day. I can't remember exactly, but he said something like, why is your skin, that color? Why is your skin so dark? And I was like, I don't know. What are you talking about? And I remember going home and talking to my mom about it, and she said, yeah, I mean, you're African American, and that's when that conversation began, and we can go more into that later. So yeah, Ohio's my home, and will always be my home. But like I said, wasn't a very diverse place growing up, and in our neighborhood, we lived in a middle class neighborhood. Dad had a good job. Mom worked when she needed to. Otherwise, she was taking care of us. But both, college educated, and from what I remember, we were fine. I'm sure there were financial hardships, but we were fine growing up. And I can remember in our whole neighborhood, which is I can't remember how big it was, is maybe a couple blocks. We lived in the cul-de-sac in a court, and we were the only black family I think at our side of the court, and there was maybe an older couple down the street, and on the other side of the street there was another I think black family, and so a lot of people in the neighborhood didn't like us and mistreated us growing up. I remember specifically like our neighbors to our left and our right were often doing things to upset my mom. Growing up, like if we're outside playing on our big wheels or whatever, they would back their cars out really fast next to us. I remember the people to our right, had an older son who would provoke my older brother. He had a gun, and I remember he'd go out in the front yard, and I can't remember if he would shoot it or just kind of wave it around and stuff. They were particularly, some of them were nasty, some of them weren't, some of them just didn't speak to us or pretend like we weren't there. And there was no shame in our game. Like I said, my dad had a good job, and my mom always had nice cars and stuff, and so she would have like a Cadillac and or a Jag or something, and I remember them looking at her, and then as she would go up the street and pull in the neighborhood and in the driveway, and them not being particularly nice to her and just not being friendly people. So but there were a couple families on the block that were really nice to us. Shout out to little Eric. I hope you see this. Him and his family, Todd and brother Todd and Chad. They were good people. For like remembering their parents were nice to us and always let us come down and play with Eric. And then I think there were other people like I think their neighbors, Sally and Christy, but whatever. It wasn't all bad. But you remember a lot of the negative because it kind of stays with you. But I do remember the good times as well. Went to so elementary was in Maranatha. High school and middle school I went to World Harvest Christian Academy. So like I said, I went to school on the east side of Columbus, and the east side of Columbus is more diverse from my memory than any other part of the city. It was predominantly, I think, African American. And then you had, a lot of immigrants come in and, lived on the east side. And so when I went to school out there, my high school class, the group of kids, wasn't exactly 50-50 as far as like white and black, but, it was more of a balance. And I got to, be around other black kids and minorities who I could relate to and, have, shared experiences with, or, they had similar experiences as I did growing up. And so that was nice. My graduating class was about, 30 kids, wasn't too big. And, when I, graduated from World Harvest Christian Academy, went to Ohio State University, was a Buckeye, OH. My Buckeyes know what that means. And going from, a graduating class of 30 kids to a freshman class at Ohio State of like, hundreds or, 1,000 or so, I can't really remember, was quite an experience. And growing up, I always thought that, you had to be a doctor or a lawyer. That's what I saw. And I grew up watching the Cosby Show, and looked up to Bill Cosby, and like a lot of kids did and people did, and that's what it is. And probably something I'll touch on later. One thing, hopefully, you'll learn about me is that I don't believe things blindly. I investigate and form my own opinion about what's being said or what's happening in any kind of situation. So that's all I'll say about that. And so when I went to Ohio State, I got to see a bunch of other kids, and I got a lot of other experiences as far as options. And I saw there was philosophy, there was just all kind of stuff that you could get into. And so I ended up leaving Ohio State University to form to forge my own path. I then kind of began on a journey of discovery, and it started with publishing a book when I was 19 called Your Supernatural Healing Begins Now. You can probably still get it a couple places. But, at that point in my life, I wrote that book seeking to help sick and infirm people physically, spiritually, mentally. And I was writing that from a Christian's point of view, which is something I'll get into later as well. But, growing up, I grew up Christian and Pentecostal, at World Harvest Church. And being around that, you were always primarily around Republicans. And that all ties in together. And, as I began my journey, MDO Ministries, evolved into MDO Enterprises, and then Sky Sound. And so, that was kind of my college. I traveled from, New York to LA, everywhere in between, and got a lot of experience dealing with people and learning about cultures and how to do business, how to carry yourself, how to deal with people, how to talk to people, how to maneuver through life. And I ended up working so hard. I became somewhat depressed at points because there was no work-life balance. So yeah, work-life balance is important. One of the things I pursued pretty heavily in Columbus was a studio, and trying to create a hub for entertainment, primarily focused around music production and artists and music, and things that will obviously grow from that. But trying to provide a professional studio in Columbus, kind of a hub where you could have people come in and talented people come in and record and put product out, and you got people coming from the Midwest. And I pushed really hard for that and got pretty far with the city as far as getting a building, and got a lot of support from the local community. Shout out to Charity and Miller Scott Associates, Scott Watson, very, very progressive architects, and I'm sure they're doing amazing things right now, and I hope to work with them in the future. But the city just wasn't having it. I would push and do the things that they asked me to do, and it just still wasn't happening. Even got a bank to the table, and it just wasn't happening. I think it was, the city just wasn't ready for it. So, when that fell through, I remember, being upset. And again, moving on to, at that point, I believe I had met my wife at that time, and I can even go into that later as far as how you're humane and how you treat women in dating. I wasn't always that way, and learned a lot from my bad behavior. And but yeah, so met my wife, and I think at that point I was looking to leave Ohio, and ended up going to Dallas, which is where I am now. I remember not wanting to go specifically to like New York or LA, because those were just the stereotypical places that you go to pursue career and entertainment. But I never felt comfortable with that. I never felt like that's the way I want to go. was wanting to do my own thing, especially with the internet now. You can do whatever you want in any place. So ended up coming to Dallas. Dallas is a much more diverse place, obviously, if you've ever been this far south. Much bigger city, a lot more opportunity as far as, careers and jobs and meeting diverse groups of people and education, just a lot of things going on here. One thing I like to point out is, growing up in Ohio, being black, the racism in Ohio has always been, from my perspective, covert. It was always there, but people would. It was more like this: you go somewhere and you couldn't get service. You go somewhere and people wouldn't acknowledge you. You would go somewhere and they pretend you weren't there. You would go to buy something and they would pretend like you didn't have the money to do it. You know, it was a lot of that growing up, just being ignored and people acting like you weren't a person. Down here in Dallas, the racism is more in your face. And, it's just these people are racist, these people aren't. But there's such a diverse group of people here that black people and Hispanic people, for the most part, it's normal for them to be successful, to have money, to be working, to be educated, to have nice cars and vehicles, and be able to do things. So I prefer that over how I was treated in Ohio. I prefer more racism that's in your face because you can see it and you know where it is. And we plan to have children and they're going to be mixed. My wife is Caucasian, so I don't want to put them in an environment where they're treated like that in not specifically Ohio, but just north. That's been my experience with racism. Is it's more covert and hidden, and you won't get treated fairly. So I'd rather have our kids in a place where it's much more diverse and they can see where it is and what's safe and what's not safe. So that's that. So where I am now, like I said, is here in Dallas, and I'm just, again, want to begin the Be Humane conversation with you, talking about, all kind of things, politics, racism, behavior, and with your friends, family, people you don't know, schools, education, but I'm going to pull obviously from a lot of my experiences. So I'm going to go into topics of discussion, kind of within that main paragraph of, who I am, and I think a lot of that's going to come from my experience getting out of religion and getting to a more spiritual place. That was a huge struggle and battle in my life, and I believe that's shaped a lot of how I am and who I am going forward.